Rain-slick streets glistened under flickering blue neon from a deli sign, the night swallowing sound except for the hum of distant traffic. My boots splashed through shallow gutters as I crossed toward the idling sedan. The door slammed and a shadow emerged, tall, broad, moving with purpose. I opened my mouth to speak, but the crack of a gunshot split the air, drowning my words. The impact wasn't on me. Frankie, my oldest friend, jerked back, crimson flooding his shirt, his eyes wide with confusion. I dropped to my knees, rain and blood mixing in the gutter, my trembling hands gripping the crucifix around his neck. "Stay with me," I whispered, but the light left his gaze. Somewhere a woman screamed, the sound twisting into the night. My heart pounded as the shooter melted into the dark, leaving me with nothing but the echo of the shot. I didn't chase. I didn't scream. I just knelt there, clutching that crucifix, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. The funeral felt colder than the rain that night. Every handshake was stiff, every embrace a performance. I stood by Frankie's coffin, the scent of lilies mixing with the stale perfume of grief. The boss spoke at the pulpit, voice warm, words painting Frankie as a saint, yet each syllable tasted like poison. His eyes found mine, holding too long like he knew what I'd seen. People whispered around me, but all I heard was the echo of that shot. As the service ended, mourners filed past, touching my shoulder, muttering condolences they didn't mean. The boss approached, embracing me with the weight of control. In the fold of the handshake, a small note slipped into my palm. "Meet me at the club. Midnight." His smile never faltered, but in his gaze I saw the same shadow that pulled the trigger. I lit a cigarette in the alley behind Rossi's bar, the smoke curling into the damp night. Inside, voices dropped when I walked in. Men I'd known for years looked away, sipping their drinks. "Bad luck, what happened?" one muttered without meeting my eyes. In the back room, Vinny leaned close, his voice barely above the hum of the ice machine. "Keep your head down. The street's talking, and they're watching you." His hand lingered on my shoulder a moment too long, a friendly warning that felt like a shackle. The air was thick with something unspoken, and every glance told me Frankie's death wasn't about a street beat. It was bigger, and I was already in it. Detective Moretti found me leaning against my car. "You're stirring puddles you can't see the bottom of," he said, eyes scanning the street. His tie was loose, coat collar up against the wind. "I'd help," he added, "but nothing's free." His smirk carried the weight of someone who had traded honor for survival long ago. I asked him what he wanted, and he just chuckled. "We'll talk." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Careful who you trust. That includes me." Then he walked off, leaving the faint scent of cheap whiskey and old rain in the air. The club's bass thumped like a heartbeat you couldn't ignore. Smoke swirled under colored lights, shadows stretching across faces. I slid into the booth across from the confidant, Maria. Her hair was a dark cascade, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "You shouldn't be here," she said, sipping her drink. I told her Frankie was dead, and I needed answers. She leaned forward, voice a whisper against the music. "Answers get you killed faster than bullets." Her hand brushed mine, a fleeting warmth in the cold game we were playing. Somewhere between the beat and her warning I realized she knew more than she would say, at least for now. The note burned in my pocket while midnight bled into morning. I walked the pier where Frankie and I boxed as kids, the tide chewing the pylons like old grudges. Maria called, her voice low and urgent. Maria said, "You want truth, you go where he keeps it." I knew where she meant. Black Harbor State, the boss's vault of flesh and silence. Moretti slid from a doorway with rain on his hat brim. Moretti said, "You're chasing ghosts into a meat grinder." I asked what lived inside those walls. He laughed without humor. "Moretti," said Ledgers, "that breathe and talk when you bruise them." The gulls cried, and the city exhaled diesel. I closed my eyes and saw the crucifix drowning in that gutter river. My mind made a decision my mouth wouldn't say yet. I would go in, and I would come out with names. Maria said, If you go alone. I told her alone was all I had left. The wind pushed the fog across the water like a veil. Somewhere a freighter's horn moaned for the dead. I picked the loudest bar near the courthouse and ordered trouble. The jukebox chewed a Springsteen ballad while suits soaked whiskey into their ties. A rookie cop bumped my shoulder and waited for me to rise. I obliged. The first chair shattered like thin ice. More voices rose, and the bartender ducked. I let the second punch land so the room would remember the story. The rook's partner swung cuffs with eager hands. I gave them my wrists and a grin that didn't reach my eyes. Moretti arrived with a tired smirk and a form already signed. Moretti said, "Judge is cranky, and you look guilty." I said nothing. He leaned in close enough to smell the rain on his coat. Moretti said 2 weeks in Black Harbor while I fixed the paperwork. I nodded because that was the plan we were pretending not to share. Maria's warning rang like glass in my ear. The door to the night clanged shut behind me. Black Harbor rose from gray marshland like a bad idea in concrete. The intake door swallowed me with a thud, then steel sang its ugly lullaby. A guard shaved my name down to a number. He stamped it into my chest with a stare. The yard smelled like wet iron and cheap tobacco. The lifers watched like crows on a wire. A man with prison tattoos, spelled in ink and scars, stepped close. He was called Padre, though he preached with knives. Padre said, "You ain't local to this parish." I told him I wanted a seat near the altar. He smiled like a cracked plate. Padre said, "Altars owned by the family upstairs." He meant the boss's payroll buried in laundry shifts and payroll ghosts. I offered silence in exchange for air. He weighed me by the weight I didn't flinch from. Padre said, "You eat with us, you bleed for us." I nodded once. The crucifix felt heavier than chains. Laundry steam turned the room into a ghost swamp. Men moved like chess pieces through heat and lint. Padre walked me past baskets that hid more than clothes. He introduced me to the bookkeeper who never touched a pen. The man's hands were too clean for prison work. He handled debts you paid in favors and flesh. Bookkeeper said, "Numbers travel better in mouths than on paper." I said I needed to hear one number only. He tilted his head and listened to distant footsteps. Bookkeeper said, "The boss buys quiet with heroin threaded through sheets." The word lodged in my ribs like shrapnel. Frankie had found a loose thread. I asked who pulled it tight. Bookkeeper said nothing, but his gaze drifted to the chapel door. Padre's shoulder brushed mine like a warning. Padre said, "Pray before you pull, brother." The washers thumped like slow drums for the hanged. Night count ended, and whispers began. Padre led me to the chapel where plaster saints wept soot. He tapped a loose tile beside the confessional, and the floor exhaled dust. Beneath, a crawl space breathed cold air and old secret. Padre said, "Old tunnel from the warden's dry days." I asked where it led. Padre said not freedom but a choice. He handed me a map sketched on cigarette paper. Lines met like rivers under the yard, under the kitchen, under the tower that ate screams. I traced a route with my thumb and tasted rust. Maria's voice floated back to me across the miles. Maria said, "Answers get you killed faster than bullets." I told the saints I was already shot. The plan wasn't an escape yet. It was a fuse waiting for a match. Moretti's promise ticked like a bomb I couldn't see. I folded the map and felt the crucifix press into bone. The map's lines ran through my mind like veins feeding a dangerous heart. Padre led me to the east wall during yard hour, pretending to smoke while his eyes tracked the guard tower. He pointed with his chin at a vent half buried in weeds. Padre said, "One of the oldest air runs in the place. No alarms if you breathe quiet." I asked how far it went. Padre said, "Far enough to die in, if you're unlucky." We pretended to talk about baseball when a guard's shadow stretched over the yard. My pulse matched the pace of the tower's sweeping light. Padre flicked his cigarette toward the vent like a blessing or a dare. I knew I'd have to crawl through that dark before I could ever breathe clean air again. The wind carried the faint stink of salt water. Freedom had a smell, but so did the grave. Inside the vent room, dust clung to my throat like dry paper. Padre's man, a wiry inmate named Ghost, pried open the grate with a screwdriver filed to a whisper. "Ghost said air's dead in there. You'll hear your own blood before you hear the end." I crawled a few feet, feeling the metal echo under my knees. The dark pressed close, and the smell of rust and mildew was thick enough to chew. My fingers found a seam where the vent widened, a place to turn without losing the way back. Ghost waited outside, humming a low tune that didn't match the fear I felt. When I backed out, the grate shut with a click that sounded like a promise. Padre was gone by then, leaving only the fading echo of his footsteps. I realized he wanted me to find my way alone, even in the dark. Especially in the dark. The chapel became my map room. I traced lines on scrap paper, stolen from the library, marking guard shifts and meal bells like constellations. Padre visited once, sliding a folded note across the pew. Padre said, "Shot caller upstairs wants to meet." I asked if it was an invite or an order. He smiled. Padre said, "Around here, same thing." The meeting took place in the library's back corner, where the fluorescent light buzzed like a dying insect. The shot caller, a gaunt man named Salvo, leaned on the table like it was a throne. Salvo said, "I hear you want to dig." I told him I wanted to get out. He laughed, a dry sound that scraped the air. Salvo said, "You dig, you pay, payments work." His eyes told me the work wouldn't be clean. I nodded, because clean had been buried with Frankie. Salvo's work was simple in words, filthy in truth. He wanted a package moved from the kitchen freezer to the laundry, with no eyes catching the pass. The freezer's chill bit into my hands as I pulled the duct-taped bundle from behind boxes of meat. It was too light to be drugs, too heavy to be paper. As I slid it into a laundry cart, a guard's shadow cut across the floor. My stomach tightened. The guard glanced in, eyes lingering, then moved on. I wheeled the cart to the laundry, where Padre waited by the dryers. He opened the bundle with a box cutter. Inside, a small revolver gleamed under the humming lights. Padre said, "Sometimes freedom comes in pieces of steel." I thought of Frankie, and the steel that took him. I hated how right Padre was. That night in the cell, I laid the cigarette paper map across my knees. The revolver wasn't mine yet, but it was in the game now. I marked the crawlspace, the vent, and the chapel in red pencil. Each mark was a bone in the skeleton of escape. From the catwalk above, a guard's boots paced in steady rhythm, the sound like a clock, ticking in the dark. I thought of Maria, somewhere in the city, moving pieces I couldn't see. Moretti's words echoed in my skull, ledgers that breathed. Maybe Frankie's death ledger was still breathing, somewhere in Black Harbor's gut. My eyes closed, but my mind kept running routes in the dark, hearing the scrape of metal, the hiss of air vents, and the whisper of the sea beyond the walls. Sleep was a stranger here. The first sign came in the mess hall. Conversations stopped when I walked in, spoons scraping slower, eyes sliding off me like oil. Padre was at his usual table, but his smile didn't reach me this time. A folded napkin sat where my tray should have been. Inside, a single playing card, the king of spades, with a red slash across the face. Padre said nothing, just kept eating, his gaze locked on a guard near the door. The air felt thick, as if the whole room knew something I didn't. The shot caller's men were missing, replaced by strangers with the same watchful stillness. I knew the card's meaning, marked for the game. Not everyone walked away when they were marked. I slid the card into my pocket, my jaw tight enough to ache. The map in my cell was no longer just a plan. It was now a countdown. That night, the yard lights cut through the fog like search beams in a war zone. I was walking laps near the far fence when Salvo's runner slid up beside me, whispering fast. Runner said, "The boss is inside. Moved into segregation 2 nights ago." My breath caught, though the cold air burned it away. I asked why. Runner said he needed to be closer to his business. I knew better. He wanted to be closer to me. Inmates along the fence started calling out, voices sharp with mockery or warning. I couldn't tell which. The tower's spotlight swept over us, and the runner peeled away like he'd never been there. My heart thudded, not from fear, but from the sudden clarity. Whatever this escape had been, it was now a race. And the man I was running from had just stepped onto the track. The riot started in laundry, sparked by a debt too small for the damage it caused. By the time I got there, steam hissed from burst pipes, and fists were swinging in clouds of lint. Padre found me in the chaos, shoving a wrench into my hands. Padre said, "Make it loud." I slammed the wrench against the pipe until it screamed, metal tearing from its bolts. Water and steam flooded the floor, blinding the guards as inmates surged. Somewhere in the mess, the bookkeeper slipped through with a satchel, vanishing like smoke. I realized then the riot wasn't about the debt, it was cover. Cover for something big enough to risk the whole yard. I followed Padre toward the service door, the wrench still hot in my grip. Behind us, the guards' shouts cut through the roar, "Closer now." We didn't make it to the service door before a shadow blocked the frame. The boss stood there, dressed in state issue like the rest of us, but his presence filled the space like a flood. Boss said, "Heard you've been digging." His voice was calm, almost amused. Padre shifted beside me, and for the first time, I saw something like hesitation in his eyes. Boss said, "We could settle this easy. No tunnels, no maps. You sit at my table, and you walk out alive." I glanced at the crucifix under my jumpsuit, felt its edge cut into my skin. I said nothing. The boss stepped closer, smile sharpening. Boss said, "Silence can be the loudest word." The guards were coming. He stepped aside, letting us through, but I knew the offer was a leash, one I'd never wear. Back in my cell, the noise of the riot still clung to my ears. I spread the map on the bunk, tracing routes with shaking hands. The boss's offer wasn't a gift, it was a warning dressed as mercy. The tunnel had to be used soon, before the walls closed tighter. From the tier below, someone shouted my name, the voice carrying more urgency than threat. I looked down to see Ghost, his eyes wide. Ghost said, "They're moving the tower guards tomorrow night. 2 hours blind in the north yard." I felt the weight of the revolver Padre had hidden under my mattress. The plan shifted in my head, roots folding and twisting like a deck being cut. 2 hours wasn't much, but in Black Harbor, 2 hours could be an eternity, or the end. The blackout hit like a held breath. Lights died, alarms stuttered, and the yard dissolved into shadows. Ghost appeared from the dark, his voice low. Ghost said, "2 hours start now." I moved fast, slipping through the chapel to the loose tile. Padre waited, revolver in hand, his eyes scanning the darkness like a predator. Padre said, "No second tries." We dropped into the crawl space, air thick with dust and mildew. My knees scraped concrete as we crawled, each sound magnified in the silence. Somewhere above, boots pounded in confused patterns. I kept the map in my head, counting turns, feeling each one like a step in a dance you couldn't afford to miss. The crucifix around my neck tapped against my chest with every breath, a reminder of the man who'd set me on this road. We were in it now, no way out but forward. The tunnel under the yard was narrower than I imagined, forcing us to move sideways in places. Padre led, his breath ragged but steady. Water dripped from cracked pipes overhead, each drop echoing like a clock counting down. I heard voices through the walls, muffled, urgent, guards searching rooms we'd left behind. My palms stung from gripping the revolver too tight. At a junction, Padre paused, shining a faint penlight at chalk marks on the wall. Padre said, "Left is kitchen, right is tower, your call." I thought of Ghost's words, 2 hours blind in the north yard, and pointed right. The air grew colder, and the tunnel sloped upward, the scent of oil and gunmetal replacing mildew. We were getting close to the edge, close to either freedom or a bullet. We emerged behind the tower's maintenance shed, moonlight cutting silver lines across wet gravel. The guard post above was empty. Ghost's timing had been perfect. Padre handed me a coil of rope from under his jacket. Padre said, "Your turn to lead." I hooked it to a rusted pipe and began to climb, boots slipping on damp metal. My pulse was so loud I almost missed the sound of a door opening below. A guard stepped out, cigarette glowing. He turned his head toward us, eyes narrowing. I froze, holding my breath as smoke curled into the cold air. Padre's hand tightened on the revolver, but the guard simply flicked ash and went back inside. I exhaled slow, muscles trembling. We kept climbing, higher into the dark. We hit the roof, and were met with chaos. The blackout had thrown the whole prison into a frenzy, and gunfire cracked from the yard as silhouettes darted between shadows. Padre scanned for the next move, but a shout cut through the night. 3 figures emerged from the far side. The boss and 2 of his men, all armed. Boss said, "You didn't think you'd leave without saying goodbye?" His smile was sharp under the moon. The wind tugged at my jacket, the rope swaying behind us. Padre raised the revolver, but the boss's men were already moving to flank. The rooftop became a killing ground, and the only way off was over the edge. The wind roared in my ears as the boss stepped closer, his pistol steady. Boss said, "Last offer, you walk with me or you don't walk at all." My grip on the revolver tightened, the crucifix cold against my chest. Padre shifted beside me, ready to fire, but I saw the twitch in the boss's finger. The rooftop felt like it tilted under us. I aimed, but the shot came from somewhere else. A sharp crack that dropped one of the boss's men before I even exhaled. Searchlights flared back to life, blinding us all. The boss cursed, ducking low, and I grabbed Padre's arm, pulling us toward the rope. Bullets sparked against the roof as we swung over the edge, into the dark, into whatever came next. We hit the ground hard behind the outer wall, rolling into wet grass. My shoulders screamed, but there was no time to check the damage. Padre said, "North fence, move." We ran low through shadows, the prison's floodlights swinging like blades overhead. A truck's engine roared somewhere beyond the perimeter. As we reached the fence, wire cutters waited in the dirt, Ghost's parting gift. Padre clipped fast, metal twanging in the dark. We slid through, and I thought we'd made it, until headlights flared ahead. Moretti stepped from the truck, hands in pockets, smirk sharp as a blade. Moretti said, "You really think I'm here to help you walk away?" His badge glinted in the moonlight, but I knew it was just decoration. The real weight he carried was in the deal he'd already made. Moretti's smirk deepened as he lit a cigarette, the glow briefly painting his face in orange. Moretti said, "You've been working for me since the second you walked into Black Harbor. The boss? Just a pawn." Padre's breath came sharp behind me, but I kept my eyes on Moretti. I asked why Frankie had to die. Moretti's tone turned casual, cruel. Moretti said, "He found my ledger, thought the boss owned it." Rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, soaking us in cold truth. Moretti flicked his cigarette away and motioned toward the truck. Moretti said, "You'll finish the job. Then maybe you'll get to keep breathing." I realized then the real escape wasn't from the prison. It was from Moretti's grip. And that was going to be harder to cut than any fence. We climbed into the truck, metal cold beneath my hands. Moretti drove slow, like the city was his to savor. He talked while the wipers beat time. Moretti said the boss thought he ran the heroin route. "I run it, I run all of it." Padre stared out the window, jaw flexing. I glanced in the side mirror, 2 black sedans trailing at a distance. Moretti saw my look and grinned. "Moretti," said insurance. The skyline rose ahead, wet streets shimmering under sodium lights. I pictured Maria somewhere out there, moving unseen pieces against him. My mind built a new map, not of tunnels and vents, but of streets, shadows, and exits. If I was going to kill Moretti, it would have to be in his own city, where he thought he was untouchable. Moretti parked in an abandoned warehouse district, the air thick with the smell of oil and rust. He killed the engine and turned to us. Moretti said, "We're meeting someone who can make all our problems disappear." The steel door groaned as he pushed it open. Inside, floodlights snapped on, revealing crates stacked high. Maria stepped out from behind one, gun in hand, eyes locked on me. Maria said, "You were supposed to trust me." Moretti chuckled, stepping between us. Moretti said, "She does. She works for me." The floor seemed to tilt, the crucifix heavy around my neck. Maria's gaze flickered for just a moment. Enough to tell me the story wasn't that simple. The sound of engines outside cut the moment short. Moretti swore, motioning for us to move. Tires screeched, doors slammed, and shouts in thick accents filled the air. The boss's men swarmed in, guns raised. Bullets tore into crates, splintering wood, spilling heroin bricks onto the floor. Maria fired first, dropping one man before ducking behind cover. Padre dragged me toward a side exit, but Moretti blocked us, gun aimed steady. Moretti said, "We all leave together, or nobody leaves." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. I felt the weight of choice pressing harder than any prison wall. The next move would decide everything: who lived, who died, and whether I'd ever walk free. The warehouse emptied into chaos. Sirens screamed closer, red-blue strobes flashing through the windows. Maria grabbed my arm, shoving me toward the back. Maria said, "Trust me now, or die here." We slipped through a rusted service door into the alley, rain hammering the pavement. Padre covered our exit, firing twice before disappearing into the smoke. The alley led to the piers, the smell of diesel and salt wrapping around us. I asked why she was helping me. Maria said, "Because Frankie saved me once, and I never paid it back." We ran along the wet planks, the glow of the city behind us, the black water ahead. Somewhere in that darkness, the end waited, one way or another. The docks were nearly empty, just the creak of ropes and the slap of waves. A freighter's horn groaned somewhere beyond the fog. Moretti's truck rolled in from the street, headlights cutting through the mist. He stepped out, trench coat billowing, gun in hand. Moretti said, "End of the line." Maria moved to flank him, but he kept both of us in his sight. I felt the crucifix under my shirt, its edges digging into my skin like a reminder. Moretti said, "I'll give you the same choice I gave Frankie. Work for me or take the swim." My hands curled into fists, rain dripping from my hair. I knew what Frankie's choice had been, and what mine would be. Before I could move, Padre emerged from the fog behind Moretti, revolver leveled. Padre said, "You don't own him." Moretti didn't turn, he fired. The shot punched Padre back into the mist, his gun clattering on the planks. I dove sideways as Moretti swung toward me, the bullet snapping past my ear. Maria fired her shot, tearing Moretti's coat but missing the mark. He advanced unshaken, like the rain and gunfire were just part of his world. My fingers found the fallen revolver, cold and slick. Moretti raised his gun for the killing shot. Time slowed. I aimed at Moretti's chest, the crucifix cold against my knuckles. My fingers squeezed, and the shot cracked through the storm. Moretti staggered, eyes wide in disbelief, then fell hard against the rail. The pistol slipped from his hand, skittering across the wet planks before tumbling into the black water. For a moment, all I heard was the rain and my own heartbeat. Maria stood frozen, the gun still in her hand, her eyes searching mine for something unspoken. I walked past her to where Moretti lay, his blood mixing with the rain, his gaze locked on me until it dimmed. Dawn broke over the harbor, the fog burning away to pale gold. I stood alone at the end of the pier, holding the crucifix now stained with Moretti's blood. The city behind me was waking, unaware of the bodies left in the night. I thought of Frankie, of the tunnels, of every shadow that had led here. Maria was gone, her debt paid in full. The gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp in the cold air. I slipped the crucifix into my pocket and turned toward the city. My voice was low, meant only for the wind. In this city, the only oath that matters is the one you take with yourself. Then I walked into the fog, leaving the pier behind.